Apple CEO Tim Cook is in India. His first stop was Mumbai and more specifically the Siddhivinayak temple. In true Mumbaikar fashion, Cook sought the Ganesha's blessing at 5 a.m. in the morning. A slew of corporate leaders made a beeline to meet the Apple CEO and its chief strategy officer of Reliance Jio, Akash Ambani. He was in fact the first one to meet him at the Siddhivinayak temple earlier this morning. The chairman of Tata Group, Cyrus Mistry, was the next to meet him at the Taj Mahal Hotel. Tim Cook then dropped in at the ICICI Bank headquarters to meet Chanda Kochar. Vodafone Sunil Sood is likely to meet him, while N. Chandrasekharan of TCS met him just a short while back. The government yesterday confirmed that Apple CEO Tim Cook's focus will be on the startup space. Here's what Niti Aayog CEO Amitabh Kant had to say when he spoke exclusively to CNBC TV 18.
Tim Cook is coming to India. Apple is coming to India. He's meeting a number of startups in Bangalore. I mean, they're doing a lot of work around apps in India, but he's coming in and he's likely to meet the Prime Minister in India.
Considering his big focus on the startup space, what does it really mean? What does his visit to India mean for the startup universe, and how will the involvement of titans like Apple impact the ever-changing dynamics of the space? To discuss all that and more, I have with me now Ravi Gururaj, the chairman at Products Council Nasscom, and Naveen Tewari, co-founder at CEO Inmobi, also joins me. Let me come to you first, Ravi, because he's visited China 8 times. This is his first visit to India. Is this really that big a deal?
Well, there seems to be a lot of excitement, clearly, with his visit.
Yes.
I think, the media has really hyped it to, a huge extent. But I think it's exciting every time you have, one of the world's top tech CEOs in your country. And it kind of, brings a lot of attention to India across the tech world. It validates that India is a market that, all the giants pay attention to, and that there's a growth opportunity here, right?
Right, absolutely. In fact, that's the growth. I mean, so currently smartphone market in India is 200 million. It's expected to grow at 400 million by 2020. So clearly there's a huge market. But then just tell me, one thing, because, while he's putting in his, all his sort of attention now to come up with an app, sort of an innovation center, creative center for app-based developers. But in India, if you look at, the market, especially of applications, we see that it's overwhelmingly in favor of Android. So iOS share of apps is very, very low. So therefore, Ravi, do you see that this is a good strategy to actually help support Indian app developers to actually sort of grow Apple's footprint in the iOS app share?
Absolutely. I mean, any app developer that's building for the mobile platforms of, across the board has to pay attention to both Android and to Apple. I think especially those that plan to go global, you cannot ignore Apple. And having Apple directly provide you assistance here in India on the ground is a fantastic move for the developers. To be able to have access to their expertise, to their people, to their techniques, tools on the ground here is going to be invaluable, in my opinion.
Absolutely, Ravi. Naveen, come in on that conversation, because a big thrust of his visit clearly is, apart from the Apple strategy in India, is also, to reach out to startups. He's already had a meeting here. He's expected to meet more budding entrepreneurs like yourself tomorrow in Hyderabad. What does it really mean for the entrepreneurial ecosystem? I mean, is it really a time for entrepreneurs to be excited about Tim Cook's visit to India?
Look, I think, it's in early days. Apple has a very small market share in India. So developers, especially those that are looking at India as a market, are a little skeptical about developing for the iOS ecosystem. It's less than 1% market share. So clearly, I think Tim Cook coming into India is more of a sign of saying, look, we care about India and we want to increase that 1% market share to some decent number. And so therefore, I think it will translate to, hopefully, that number should translate to something meaningful for app developers to essentially be more excited about that ecosystem. Today, clearly, it's a very it's a second platform, but a very distant second platform for any app developer, especially that's just focused on India. So I hope his trip here is more around figuring out how he's going to figure out taking the market share, which is pretty low to a significantly different number.
Right, Naveen. In fact, we're going to come to his, Apple's market share and how and the strategy that they should adopt to sort of increase that share. But Naveen, also tell us a little bit, because why I asked you that question about his focus on the startup space is because very recently he's made an announcement of $1 billion in Didi, the app-based taxi service in China, which is a rival to Uber, and many are actually construing that investment as as a starting of a future where Apple is seeing a future post the beyond just the smartphone. So in that sense, do you see, do you expect somewhere down the line some of Apple's investments also coming into the Indian startup space?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Look, it's the most valuable company on the planet, and that company starting to look at India in a more favorable manner is a brilliant sign. Clearly, for the startup ecosystem, I think the investment into Didi is essentially an indication of them valuing local applications and local services a lot more than global applications. So clearly, if one were to look at the Indian ecosystem, one could make an argument to say, look, the Indian ecosystem yet doesn't have local applications that are large enough yet to demand an investment from Apple or similar companies, but that's not a far-fetched future where I would imagine a lot of very, very strong local applications to make way for Apple to be essentially make sure that they're party to that ecosystem, whether directly on the platform or indirectly through areas where Apple is interested in. So clearly China, and then hopefully over the next few years, India becomes an important part of their strategy.
Right, absolutely, and perhaps very well will be. Ravi, what do how do you think that Apple will be able to claw up its market share? It's about less than 1% currently. Because what is interesting, and I want to put that statistic in front of both of you, is that from January to March, while the overall Indian smartphone market volumes grew by 23%, Apple's volumes in India during the same 3-month period grew by 56%. Of course, it was on a much, much lower base. But do you see, considering the higher premium, pricing that Apple has, there is a realistic possibility for Apple to increase its market share, at least from the 1% range that it is in currently? To you, Ravi.
Yes, I think I think the bulk of the market will still be at the lower end in India. I think a lot of the growth will come from there, and I think Apple will need to figure out how they play across the entire value chain, right? Not just at the premium end. If they're really going to take significant share in India, I think that's something that they'll have to consider. I think there's also the opportunity to grow the premium end of their share at the premium end, right? Which I think they'll try to do as well aggressively. So I expect them to compete in India just like they do anywhere else in the world, but probably have a localized offering in terms of the value chain, right? The lower end of the value chain, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, Ravi. In fact, we had D. Shivkumar, currently the chairman of PepsiCo in India, but before that he was, of course, the Nokia MD, and he also said that he had no doubts in his mind that Apple had to be present at least in a larger part of the value chain. So Naveen, one way in which Apple is trying to get volumes in India is by selling refurbished Apple phones. Do you think that is the right strategy to go ahead? Because many are wondering that if they do that, that might just dilute brand Apple. What's your take?
Look, I think I think of this at three different levels.
Okay.
One is pricing. The phones are extremely expensive for the India's market, India's GDP per capita. So clearly, it's not China yet, and I don't think Indian consumer can actually afford a very expensive phone. Second is there are no strong local applications that are just exclusively to Apple that ensures and forces consumers to essentially use the Apple, be part of the Apple ecosystem. So that's second. I think the third is the distribution. The distribution scale that they have a very limited distribution, so therefore they're really not reaching the masses for them to actually even experience the product. So coming back to the refurbished products, I think there are two issues there. Clearly, one, I think that's less of an issue that refurbished Apple products will be an issue I think the bigger issue for them is, the bigger issue for the government would be that, look, you're actually bringing in exported products which you would flood the market with, and so therefore I don't think the government would allow that, especially given that a lot of the other large handset manufacturers are essentially building their products here, manufacturing their products here, and manufacturing of smartphones is a big, big play. Don't forget, 75% of the new smartphone users in the world over the next several years will come from India. The Indian government knows this, and so therefore they have to really utilize this fact in their advantage to make sure that all the large smartphone manufacturers use India as a base for manufacturing, because that would create employment, bring in certain amount of IP in the country. And so I actually don't think refurbished is a big issue from an Apple brand point of view. Maybe it is, but I think it's a bigger issue for the Indian government.
Absolutely. In fact, there are already indications that the Indian government does not want to give in to that request of Apple, but who knows, he will be meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Saturday. In fact, many are hoping that it does not get through, but clearly there is an expectation that he will certainly raise that issue. But it's an important point you made there, Naveen. Ravi, come in on that. Considering the fact that he's saying that the bulk of the growth now in smartphone market will be driven by India, is that enough of an incentive, you think, that Narendra Modi can put in front of Apple to actually start some sort of manufacturing here? Because India is not part of Apple's value chain. What is interesting is that Foxconn will be commissioning their India plant soon, where they have invested $5 billion. Do you think that is a realistic expectation to have as the next step, Apple to start some sort of manufacturing in India, at least for some of its components?
See, I think it's a little bit of chicken and egg. I think they have to have enough share here, enough units being sold for them to want to manufacture here. I think hopefully they can get some of that going, that engine going, and then, the manufacturing here becomes almost a second step, right? And that we encourage them to manufacture here to have access to an unfettered market, right? I think it'd be great to see both happen, for them to grow, take share from the growth, portion that will come naturally across India's ecosystem, and also to manufacture here. I think I'd like to see them produce localized products, right, that are appropriate for the Indian market and Indian price points, but still have a lot of the Apple magic in them, right? That would be great.
Right, Ravi. Also comment on that, Ravi, because I didn't get your opinion on this. How do you see this, Apple's plan of actually selling refurbished Apple phones, iPhones in India? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, I'd like to see them build new phones out of India, personally. But generally, in matters like this, I tend to go with the market, and I think Indian consumers are very discerning. They'll make the right value choice every time. They'll be value seeking. They'll have to weigh up refurbished versus a new phone from potentially another vendor and decide what they want to do. I don't really have a good sense of whether it's really going to work or not, and I'd like to see how it actually plays out. I hope they encourage to manufacture here fundamentally.
Absolutely. Naveen, final question to you, and then I'll ask my final question to Ravi before I let you guys go. With this announcement of starting some sort of an app development center in India, many are wondering that this could somehow in the future position India as some sort of a app hub. India could be the next hub for many of these apps that are meant to go into smartphones. Do you think in that regard there could also be a big business and an investment opportunity for a company like Apple? Remember, they're sitting on a cash pile of $150 billion.
Look, I think Apple's strategy has been a platform strategy. It's not so much an app strategy per se to begin with. Their platform needs to have larger scale in order for them to attract app level investment. Having said that, it's not also a small platform. Yes, in India it's a very, very small, minuscule platform today, but I think if they were to essentially look at India as a platform, they probably need to invest into making that platform larger before they they go after the app development ecosystem. Even if they look at the app development ecosystem in India on the iOS from a global perspective, I think that in that manner it's a decent investment. Though I would argue that the bigger need for them is to essentially increase their footprint in an Indian market. Remember, they have less than 1% market share. 75% of the growth is going to come from India. They need to do something about this market. So I think the bigger fight for them, from an app ecosystem or app investment perspective, would be to say, hey, can I create certain applications that even though my app ecosystem is smaller in India, they can get attracted to that smaller ecosystem, and that will obviously fuel their platform growth, and therefore that investment makes sense as a longer-term strategy to increase their market share alongside a few other things like a reduction of pricing of newer devices, better distribution system, more indigenous applications. So I think alongside other things that investment does make sense.
That's very well put, Naveen. Let me give you the final word then, Ravi. If at all India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is able to convince Apple to come to India and start some sort of manufacturing, do you think that will be a big feather in the cap of our Prime Minister?
Sure. I mean, I think having Foxconn set up a huge plant here and manufacturing iPhones, not just for India. I hope they manufacture for the rest of the world also out of India. That would be a huge feather in Prime Minister Narendra Modi's cap for sure. I think from a developer perspective, it's awesome already to have Apple landed here in India and helping our developer ecosystem. Because I think you'll see apps that are developed for both the local market and I think near term this accelerator will actually help those that are trying to go global much more near term in terms of getting them off the ground, getting them to world-class standards, assisting them with best practices and things like that. And that's a huge a boost, for some of our developers because Apple has tremendous distribution. They have a clean monetization strategy. They have lots of share around the world in other markets that are harder for our developers to tap into. And so they represent a huge channel through which, you can sell through to the rest of the world.
Ravi Gururaj, Naveen Tewari, appreciate you joining us here on The Big Picture. It's clear there's a consensus. If Apple has to increase its market share in India, clearly it will need perhaps an India variant of its global strategy. Because remember, unlike in many of the countries, even in China, where carriers offer mobile handsets to their customers, in India, you don't quite see that. So in this case, they will certainly have to beef up their distribution channel.